Hey everyone, it's been a while. For the past 2 months, I've been working on this update for my Souls-like template. Everything was going pretty smoothly, got some fixes done, got item drops added for enemies, patrolling, weapon ascension, etc. But the one thing that's really worth talking about is the main menu, specifically the control bindings. At first I tried it the normal way, using the experimental enhanced input user settings, but once I had that set up, I realized it didn't support multiple keys for one mapping, nor does it support adding triggers or modifiers. It also just didn't work that well. If I recall, it had some issues with gamepad mappings and keyboard mappings in the same action, for some reason. So anyway, I had to get creative. I found the only way to access triggers and modifiers is directly from the input mapping context itself. I also found that you can map directly to an input mapping context. The only issue is this modifies it permanently, at least in the editor. This isn't the case for a built project, but I'll get to that. First, I had to make sure I can create an input trigger that listens for a list of specific keys being pressed before it allows the action to trigger. Turns out you can actually create input triggers during runtime as objects, and then you can save those to an input mapping and it will send that back to the mapping context. So I created my custom trigger that queries the keys you provide for being pressed. Easy enough. Next I thought, okay, I'll keep my IMC player for defaults and transfer that dynamically to IMC mappable. When I tried to create my custom trigger and save it to the mapping context, I discovered that when I stopped simulating, the IMC would lose its reference to the trigger and reset it to nothing. This would have been the end, but I remembered when creating an object, the outer is the owner of the object, and if the owner is being destroyed, of course the object will too, in this case the trigger. So the place I had set this up is in one of the player widgets, meaning with an empty outer, the owner would be the widget. You see where I'm going? The outer had to be something persistent. So my first thought was, let's use the enhanced input local player subsystem itself. So that's what I opted for, and that's what worked. Now, even when I quit simulation, the reference is saved. So far, everything is looking good. It's just a matter of reworking everything I had initially. Once everything was in place, I built the project to test in standalone, and it worked. But the input mapping context did not save anymore. So when you relaunch the game, it would reset. I knew I had to save the mappings in a save game file now. At this point, I already had a custom enhanced input user settings class, so I used that. Upon remapping, I had the system also send all the relevant mapping info to the user settings, and apparently in standalone, custom user settings classes do not work. No! I'm so done with the experimental enhanced input crap by now. So here we go. Normal save game asset, and everything just goes in there. It loads on startup, and at last, that works. All this because I didn't want to settle for only remapping to a single key. I was getting closer and closer to using C++, but so far this project isn't, and I want to avoid that extra requirement of Visual Studio for users. Plus, I'm pretty sure Epic will support multiple keys eventually. Maybe. This system can technically map as many keys to one action as you want, but I figured a cap of 3 made sense. I also want to shout out my Discord, where I will post more frequent updates. Things that don't really deserve a whole video. I also want it to be a place where people can help each other out. Of course, I do when I can, but as is evident from the upload schedule here, I'm pretty backed up. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Naturally, if you want a tutorial on top of this overview, leave your comment below, as well as any other requests, and I will see you in the next video.